G'day guys and gal. Although it may not feel like it because they're a bit useless right now, but the Eldar were by far the most successful race in the entire setting of Warhammer 40k. After all, they literally ruled the galaxy for 60 million years, with each Eldar basically being immortal via reincarnation. The Eldar gods were dominant in the warp and they kept chaos at bay, and there was literally nothing that could challenge them. Even the Krorks, gigantic orcs that could slap a Primarch around like a bitch, were beaten by this ascendant Eldari Empire. And then they decided to have a hectic drug-fueled galactic blood orgy and ruined everything by spawning Slaanesh, the chaos god of having way too good of a time. But the kicker is that the Eldar knew that they were spawning Slaanesh and many of them knew it would be extremely bad. So why did they do it? Why didn't they just pull out and stop the nonsense and abort that godlike fetus? Before we get started, there is only 24 hours left before the 2024 cosplay calendar is gone. 11 cosplays, 6 models, and some of the most tasteful titty pics you'll ever see, all based in the universe of the much beloved Battle Mace 40 million. The Legendary Edition is sold out, but there is still plenty of A4 and A3 versions left. Probably too many, to be honest. So for this final 24 hours, I've also taken down the digital version. So if you want to see some action, you'll need to pick up a physical calendar. If you wanted to try a bit before you buy, I've put up one of the fully edited, uncensored months up on Patreon, and I've also linked to each of the models' Instagrams in the description below. Link to purchase is also below, don't miss out. Today we'll go over why the Eldar didn't just stop spawning Slaanesh, going into detail regarding the fall, and if it was actually possible to stop the slut god from being born. Let's get into it. To answer the question as to why the Eldar didn't stop literally fucking their own race to death, we also have to ask why and how this situation happened in the first place. The Eldar had reigned supreme over the galaxy for 60 million years, their dominance so complete that the idea of hardship was all but gone. With their wars being fought by automatons and all sorts of labour or hard work had also been phased out, via automation. Each Eldar lived like a king, and with their long lifespans and ability to reincarnate with all their memories intact, even death wasn't an issue for them. They'd also gained complete independence from their gods, as many years prior, Cain had a bit of a hissy fit and tried to kill the Eldar, so the other Eldar gods permanently sealed the gods off from real space to protect them, so the gods could no longer directly intervene. With their eternal, easy as hell lives, the Eldar began to get bored and turned to debauchery as a way of entertainment. Now, it wasn't just a full-on blood orgy all the time, it was mostly drug benders and whatnot, with Eldar society still looking like this pristine, orderly thing from the outside. Many Eldar did not partake in the fun, with many of them not even aware that there were sex cults popping up everywhere. As the Eldar are highly psychic, if many of them began getting all sexy and silly, that would eventually reflect in the warp. In this case, it was the slow but steady creation of Slaanesh. Slaanesh then in turn fed the desires of the Eldar, which pushed them to commit greater acts of degeneracy in their name of pleasure, which would then create this vicious cycle that served to empower Slaanesh more and more. The outcome was obvious to many. The Eldar Exodites foresaw the calamity and noped the fuck out of there, escaping to distant maiden worlds. Then closer to the fall, the craft worlds foresaw the end as well, and picked up as many pure Eldar from the falling Eldar worlds as possible before also getting the hell out of there. Shortly after, Slaanesh would be born, ripping the Eye of Terror back open and flooding the Eldar worlds with warp energy. Slaanesh was able to directly drain the soul and kill most of the Eldar race in a single instant. However, some of the more strong-willed Eldar, like the man who had become Asurmen, were able to resist. So Slaanesh summoned forth an endless tide of demons who soul raped almost everyone else to death. Some Eldar worlds didn't even really have much pleasure stuff happening, but they also fell because they were too close to the initial blast radius. It was a bad time for everyone. But with the Exodite warning, the Cryfield Farseer warning, and even the Still Faithful Priest warning, many Eldar knew what was coming, so why didn't they stop it? Well, there was actually a number of attempts to stop it that we will get into, but it fundamentally comes down to the fact that many Eldar were actually keen for Slaanesh's birth and thought that the Exodites and the others were being a bunch of boring ass pussies. They did not know that Slaanesh was going to kill them all and devour their souls. They just thought she would bring the bags of coke and the molly water. Many other Eldar just didn't think it was that big of a deal. Many Eldar gods had been born, and it generally was a good thing. 60 million years of dominance had made the Eldar feel unstoppable and extremely arrogant. Even the ones who try to resist the slutification of their race were having trouble, as the influence of Slaanesh was creeping into the hearts of all. The Eldar gods could not directly intervene due to the barrier put in place, as well as the fact that the worship they needed to empower them was now being directed towards Slaanesh, so they weren't very strong. However, they did reach out to their disciples and warn them. In turn, these priests tried to preach against Slaanesh, but it wasn't wasn't enough. Vorl took matters a step further and guided a number of his priests to forge a legendary god-killing sword made out of death itself. When the fall happened and Slaanesh attacked, the priests emerged from their temple with the sword. They were able to cast down and scatter the Slaaneshi sluts, and then they turned their attention onto the Prince of Pleasure itself. They stabbed Slaanesh with the god-killing sword, and while Slaanesh didn't enjoy it that much, she was too powerful by this point and survived, before then killing the priests. Kain then tried to throw hands with Slaanesh and was actually putting up a pretty bloody good showing of it. However, with how strong Slaanesh was and how weakened Kain was, plus Khorne probably getting involved, Kain was shattered. So it all really came down to some extremely insidious, slow corruption that buttered the Eldars' cheeks before going in dry. The fall was actually a great example of Slaaneshi corruption. Starts off seemingly harmless, then before you know it, you're balls deep in your sister's ass while using your dead brother's blood as lube. Slippery slope, guys and gal, don't do drugs. The pleasure cults had become too powerful to directly oppose by the time the faithful Eldar saw what was happening, and to be honest, a pleasure cult sounds a lot more fun than the standard Eldar religions. This coupled with the fact that most Eldar, even the non-pleasure ones, didn't see what was happening as a huge deal. There were also the Dark Muses, Slaaneshi prophets, that were hyping up the Birth of Slaanesh as this really fun thing. No one who got consumed thought it would be that bad. Chaos says that the only reason why Slaanesh consumed the Eldars' souls and hunts them is because her feelings got hurt when she was born and the Eldar rejected her. But that just sounds like some propaganda, so Chaos doesn't have to admit that worshipping it always ends badly. Is there anything the Eldar could have realistically done to prevent the fall? Let's say you're the leader of the Eldar Empire and you notice that a small but growing percentage of the population have started partying a little too hard. Then let's say you get a vision from Asuryan that shows you the fall in detail and how shit everything will be if Slaanesh gets born. Could you stop the birth and save your people? It would be tough, but I would say yes. But you would need to be severe, issuing martial law before then hunting down and executing all of the pleasure cult members, which would definitely stop or at least slow the birth initially, but you would lose the support of your people and the pleasure cults would keep popping up as fundamentally the Eldar are still bored. Now, for something more permanent, you'd have to think harder. A great solution would be to drum up an external threat that would capture the attention of the people, perhaps infesting a nearby system with orc spores, letting them battle each other and other Eldar constructs so they got big and scary, and then directing them to attack Eldar space. That would actually be a pretty good idea. The Eldar would fear this threat. There would be a call to arms, especially if you were able to sabotage many of the automata that usually fought the Eldar wars. Suddenly, shit wouldn't be so boring. There would be no reason for the average Joe to become a party fiend. Then with everyone distracted by the orc threat, you could conduct private purges of the pleasure cults while propping up the old Eldar gods, requesting their blessings for the wars ahead. Another tactic could be to try birth Ynnari instead of Slaanesh, or maybe before Slaanesh, as Ynnari is the counter to Slaanesh. The priests kind of tried this by forging the Deathblade, but it wasn't enough. If Eldar souls were directed to Ynnari and death as opposed to empowering Slaanesh, there's a decent chance the Eldar death god could become supreme and take out the slugs. After all, Ynnari and Slaanesh are very closely tied together and do look pretty similar. If I didn't know better, I would say that the Ynnari, avatar of Ynnari, looks a lot like a demon prince of Slaanesh. Other things you could do includes outlawing automation machines, forcing the Eldar back into labor and keeping them from getting distracted. It's likely that the threat of Slaanesh would exist for a while, with the cults constantly popping up here and there, becoming more crafty and secretive. The orc threat wouldn't last forever after all, and even if the threat of Slaanesh was delayed by 1,000 years or two, that isn't super long in Eldar time. A permanent solution would be to remove the barrier Asuryan put that separates the Eldar and their gods, or to birth Ynnari to act as the eternal guardian against Slaanesh. The Eldar could also work with the Emperor to starve Chaos and destroy it, which would also be a potential solution. Fortunately, as the other Chaos gods don't really like Slaanesh that much, it's unlikely that they would try to intervene to ensure her birth. But if Titsnitch saw Slaanesh's creation as essential to creating a galaxy full of chaos, then who knows? Maybe the Changeling will pay you a visit for some stabby. But then again, you are the Lord of the Eldar at the Empire's peak power. You'd probably fuck up the Changeling pretty easily. But then again, would the Eldar interfere to make sure Slaanesh is born? After all, it was the birth of Slaanesh that cleared out all the galaxy's warp storms and allowed humanity to begin the Great Crusade, while also removing their greatest rival. But would there have been the warp storms to begin with if Slaanesh's birth was aborted? So many questions, so many what ifs. Ah well, I'm glad it did happen, otherwise we wouldn't have gotten Margan Ra. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then pick up the A4 or A3 of the cosplay calendar. Last 24 hours, guys and gal, this is it. Hit the subscribe button and hit the real subscribe button for more abortive content. Join the Discord for more memes and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.